Welcome everyone to Mailfuzz TV. I am Peter, and today I'm going to be talking about Fallout Season 1, Episode 8. It is the finale of the season, and it is called The Beginning. And everything comes together. It's funny because I complained a little bit, just a little bit. The Episode 7 felt a bit less focused because there was like every character had a plot. Everyone had something that advanced a little bit, so maybe there was less time to really focus on stuff. The finale obviously does kind of have a capper to everyone's story. It makes sense that there's going to be conclusions to some extent for everyone. But the difference with the finale is that all of it kind of converges, right? And, some of the characters do meet physically, but more so that what the plots are all talking about and what they're thematically all about all comes together in the end. If anything, the Brother of Steel stuff, which kind of starts off the episode, is the one that feels the most separate until they physically come in and invade the rest of the plot. But everything else with the flashbacks, with the ghoul spying on his wife, with Lucy finding her father in Moldaver, and then even Norm in the vaults, like all of those things all sort of come together to reveal the same information. They all sort of like build with each other, and we get a clear reveal of a few things from all three of those perspectives kind of simultaneously. And it felt really well constructed. It feels like we've been kind of building to this for a while, which I guess is where I'll start, is just kind of talk about what we learn here. As kind of implied somewhat before, Vault-Tec are behind the nukes. They intentionally nuked the country, possibly the entire planet. Although, to be fair, when they're in their secret meeting room, talking about stuff and they're like, here's all the vaults in America, they only ever bring up the US. They never actually mention the rest of the world. So I actually don't know what the traditional Fallout lore is about the rest of the planet, but I assume it's not in great condition. Otherwise, why aren't they helping with whoever's left in the US? I don't know. Maybe Canada just has had enough and it's like, no, we're not helping. We're not going in. But the big thing here, though, is that specific admission that we'll drop the bombs ourselves line is delivered by the girl's wife. And I think that's a really big moment in this episode, in this reveal. Because I especially like that he's listening into the conversation, he's made his way into the building, under an excuse to sit in her office, so he's close enough to get a reception on his bug. And he hears all these other awful people, all these CEOs, all these evil corporations talking about what they can do with these vaults. And we kind of imply some of the things we've seen. Someone talks about experimenting with mutations, and that's, seems to be what Vault 4 has turned out to be. And likewise, it seems to be Bud's whole idea to have these three interconnected vaults. And we get some more of that later with Norm specifically as to what's going on with those. There's a moment when his wife starts talking, because she'd been quiet up until that point, and you see him basically just sort of mutter to himself. The girl says, go on, set them straight. Like, he's hoping that his wife is going to be the sensible voice in the room, that she's the one who's going to say, no, this is absolutely diabolical, this is inhumane, whatever. And instead, Barb is the one who says, we're going to drop the bombs ourselves to ensure that all of this actually happens, to ensure that this plays out. And what this is really all about is just erasing all competition. And in this scene, they're kind of talking in a capitalist sense, but it certainly, as the episode goes on, you kind of get the vibe that it's not just that. I think later on, when Hank, Lucy's father, is kind of like talking to her about it a little bit when he's in the cage, he kind of talks about how, people always break up into factions, and these factions will always fight, and there'll always be war. So the way to ensure a better future is to remove the factions. And at that point, it felt like less about a capitalist victory, in terms of money and business, and more about just straight up cleansing of your enemy, right? Not necessarily ethnic cleansing, but even you can sort of draw comparisons to that, because we're just removing anyone who sees differently across the board. It's pure evil. And the girl's reaction to hearing this, where he goes into kind of a trance, and then it hits you with the reveal that the executive that wants to meet him is actually young Hank. Because the other reveal that goes along with all this is that Vault 31 is nothing but cryopods for executives from Vault-Tec, the idea being that the people in charge in Vault 32 and 3 are always people who were alive when they planned all this out. The idea being that they'll keep things going the way they want to because there's always one of them in charge. So they're just being woken up every generation, a few of them every generation, to come in and be in charge and make sure things are going the way they're supposed to. That's the experiment of the trio of vaults. So that was a cool reveal, and it kind of made sense. The end of the last episode kind of implied that it was just a mechanical thing, which, by the way, I love the brain Roomba. Like, the brain in the Roomba was cracking me up. Just how helpless he was to be like, no, don't go in there. Oh, he's going in there. Oh, no, definitely don't look at that. You can't find this stuff out. He's going to find this stuff out. Like, the way he was talking to himself was quite funny, and I'm pretty sure this was meant to be Bud's brain in the jar who's keeping this all going, because this was all his idea. But yeah, we see all these cryopods. It makes sense based on everything. It generally makes me curious, getting into season 2, what Norm's plot, if any, is going to be. I do wonder, if anything, I would say that maybe a slight concern I would maybe have get into a season 2 is that they would feel the need to keep all of the various plot lines going, even if there's no reason to. And I wonder, now that we've had this reveal, if there's something that they should spend time on with the vaults, 33 and 31, and continuing that story. Because everything about those stories has been about building up to this reveal, and it's tied very neatly into what Lucy's finding out in the wasteland with her father, and the more personal side of it. I do wonder if there's a risk that they feel the need to keep doing a plot line in the vaults next season, but maybe there wasn't a good reason to. And that's just all, it's all just theorizing. Like, I don't actually know. They may have a great reason to keep doing plots there. It's just the sort of thing that I've seen TV shows fall victim to before. They'll do a season where there's maybe 3 plot threads that they're kind of doing the whole time, 3 sets of characters they're keeping an eye on, and then you get to the next season, and the main plot, whatever one you would consider that to be, clearly keeps having a direction to go in, because that was always the one that was really mapped out, but the other ones maybe start to suffer because they weren't as thought out. They only served a purpose in the initial story tying into the main plot, and then it gets a little bit rough after that. There's no reason to think that's going to happen here. It just occurred to me that I just don't know what to do with with Norm and the other vaults now, especially since Norm is now locked in Vault 31, and his best recommendation right now is to just go and sleep in the pod until everyone's going to wake up when the world's better. But it would be weird if he does just disappear, I guess. So I don't know. I'm curious to see where they go with that. If this is where they decide to drop that, I could. That said, though, I think the Gogs, the ghoul, the Gogginator, he did call the assistant at Vault-Tec Betty, so I think that was meant to be the young version of Betty who's in Vault 33. Obviously, she's much older in Vault 33, so it's a different actress, but I think that's what they were going for. It is kind of funny, though, because they spent all that money de-aging Kyle MacLachlan for, his younger self. It's kind of a disconnect not to do it for the other character in the scene who's supposed to be the young version of someone else, because you've just you've told the audience that this is how we'll represent a younger character, but then you've done it the traditional way with someone else. That is a little bit strange now that I'm thinking about it, but I get why they did it for Kyle MacLachlan, because they wanted the big moment where we see his face, and it's that's the reveal. We see his face and it hits us. They wanted it to hit us. And it's interesting because obviously we have a lot of reference material for him, because he's been an actor who's been working for 30, 40 years at this point. So we can go back to, Twin Peaks days and see what Kyle MacLachlan looked like when he was about 30 or whatever age he's supposed to be in this part of the timeline. Anyway, I feel like I'm finding a couple of nitpick things there to sort of ponder over. But the actual content here was really, really good. I really enjoyed this reveal. It made sense given everything we've seen so far. And then, of course, the linchpin, the kicker, the end of it all, is that Hank, as part of his duties to make sure that other civilizations don't rise up on the surface, because that's what they don't want. They want to make sure the surface is desolate, so it's just the people in the vaults to rise up and take over. Hank's the one behind the nuking of Shady Sands, the city that was established that we saw the creator of. And this is something that I think the season's done a good job of building up to, because not only did we see the devastation of the big crater, We have personal ties to it because Maximus was there in a survivor. We have personal ties to it in the sense that Lucy got to meet some survivors as well, other than Max in Vault 4. We got that big moment where she was seeing the timeline of events and how it all, when it happened and that this new civilization did form, but then was taken away again. And it's kind of devastating when you think about the fact that to her that was a heavy blow. To her that was taking away a lot of hope. That new civilization had risen up, but it was taken away so quickly again. And that left her feeling hopeless. So the irony that her father is in charge of making sure new civilizations, rival civilizations, can't rise up and dealt with it and did that horrific thing by dropping a nuke, which they still seemingly have access to somehow. That is, I think, a good dramatic gut punch. So I really enjoyed that like part of the revelations, especially since that was the part that I don't think was as obvious going in, right? And this is not a critique what I'm about to say, but the idea that Vault-Tec's behind the bombings, the idea that Vault-Tec's up to something shady with how they're managing, Bud made that big speech just last episode or two ago about how winning's all about time and management, and it's the idea that they'll outlast people and they can manage the population. The idea of management being like not just managing business, but managing people's lives and their ideologies and managing how they live and managing what's allowed, what's not allowed, straight up just kind of dictatorship style ideas. These seeds were all there, so the first chunk of these revelations, well, it was great to finally hear them outright. The idea that Hank was then also behind the bombing of Shady Sands, and even the idea that, and this was a great little pull from earlier in the season, is we find out that Lucy's mother had left the vault because she had figured out or speculated that life outside had started to rise up, and that Shady Sands was this place that she took her. So if you remember back to like episode, I don't even know what episode this was in, but she gave a speech about how she used to think that the sun outside felt real. She talked about how the sun and the projector and the farm and the vault felt real, but she realizes that it was her mother that made it feel real. That was actually a really interesting seed, because we find out that as a young child, around 4 years old or something like that, she was taken outside the vault. She was brought to Shady Sands. That memory of being in the cornfield and looking up at her mother and the sun, she remembers a little bit more of it when she gets this information and she sees vehicles, she sees a functioning city. She was taken outside the vault, and Hank came out and got her and then nuked the city. Now, obviously, he has business reasons for nuking the city as well, but you can't help but feel that there was a bit of vindictiveness here, that his wife had taken his children from him, kind of thing. Like, it definitely feels like that felt kind of hinted at to me with his reaction here. Very interesting. It's funny that we didn't see this character for all season until the last episode again. He was literally in that opening chunk of episode 1, and then here in the finale. And of course, he's still around at the end of the episode. Following him is going to still be the plot in season 2. Although it's now shaken up because now he's clearly a villain. He's on his way to New Vegas, apparently. Which, this is the thing, like, I sort of kind of recognized it, but what's so funny is that New Vegas is the game that I started playing because of this show, because I wanted to try playing a Fallout game, and it was the one that seemed the most appealing because I had a lot of good buzz, and I'd gotten bored of 4 when I tried it. And I've not gotten too far, and I don't know how far I will get. I might not continue with it, but it was really funny that the ending of this was kind of like, hey, we're doing New Vegas stuff. Like, next season, we're going to have stuff in New Vegas. I don't know how well it lines up with the events of the game or whatever. I know that there's some hubbub online that one of the dates on the on the chalkboard when Lucy saw the timeline, apparently one of the dates there contradicts something in New Vegas, which upsets some fans. It may just be a mistake more than anything, or a minor retcon because they have to make it fit with something else that they know they're going to do later. Who knows? I don't think it's a big deal, all things considered. I think the fact that they're even going to New Vegas and making it a part of the show, like, because they're not really going to anywhere iconic from the other games. Like, that's kind of a big deal that they're going to a location from that game and they're going to make it realized and all that. That's interesting, at least. So yeah, I mean, other notes about all these reveals, all these other evil companies. One being the Robo Company, the others are, I think the others are from the games, but I don't know them very well. But they all basically get to compete by doing their own experiments in their own vaults as to how they hopefully rebuild humanity. Because despite them saying that they're taking out all the other factions and the other competition, they kind of treat the other major corporations that are like them as good competition. They're like, hey, good competition's what's made us all thrive in this capitalist market, so we want that competition to keep going. It almost kind of contradicts the core idea, right? The core idea of wiping everyone else out, so it's only them that get to keep going. But I mean, I guess hypocrisy is a big part of this, all things considered, right? So, no, super interesting. I mean, if I have critiques about any of this stuff, it's maybe just that a few characters completely vanishing until the last episode does feel a little bit weird in some cases. Also, Dane, the character that was in Maximus's plot back in episode 1, is back here as well. So there's a few characters in this one that we haven't seen since episode 1, and that was almost a bit weird to sort of take in. But I think all of the way it built up and paid off, the way it was intercutting between all the various reveals, and how it naturally went from Lucy hearing something from Moldaver to the Ghoul hearing something in the flashback to Norm seeing the cryopods or whatever. All that stuff was very well done. It was entertaining, and the reveals made a reasonable amount of sense. I think the only little bit that I would maybe say was a touch too far is the idea that this really awful looking ghoul in the room who could barely move turned out to be Lucy's mother sitting in the chair. That felt like a little bit much to me. just a touch. I mean, don't get me wrong, it does give Lucy the moment later on where she gets to put her out of her misery, which I think is why they did this. It was kind of about sort of moving on with this next stage, because now she's a new person, she's learned new things, all of her ideals have just been shattered. But all of this culmination's good stuff. You know, when Max is there, the Brotherhood of Steel were going to kill him. Dane admits that they are the ones who, they put the blades in the boots themselves, which is fine. From a perspective, it was more about a fear of going into the wasteland and wanting to go away. That didn't intend for that to be blamed on Maximus. So Maximus is like, hey, I can lead you to the head, the cold fusion. And I think when Lucy said, come find me, I don't think she meant bring an entire army of killing machines to my location, because that's what ends up happening, which, for the record, is was it the Griffith Observatory, the famous observatory you see in a bunch of movies up in the hills, which I thought was neat, because when the cold fusion thing turns on and you see the lights of the decimated city light up, what I thought was cool about that is that because we're up in the hills, it's very, very similar to the view that we had in episode 1 when the bombs fell. Like, that moment when, Goggins is at the party with his daughter, it's a very similar view of the city from up on high, and I thought that was a really interesting thing to show, hey, civilization can come back, here's a very similar visual of that again, but obviously under a very different context. I thought that was a smart little touch. Maximus immediately lets out Lucy's father from the cage when he comes in with his gun, obviously not being aware yet of exactly who he is or what he's done. And then Lucy tries to explain to him, but he gets knocked out because his daddy, or her daddy, sorry, steals the power armor from the headless guy that just walked in. Hank is on the loose. The Ghoul wants to chase him, which I guess brings us to the Ghoul and his badass entrance. It's kind of funny how this episode in a lot of ways felt like it mirrored episode 2 as well, because episode 2 was all them arriving in Philly, the small town, and having this kind of big action set piece. This felt like that turned up to 11, in the sense that it's this big army of Brotherhood of Steel coming in. And the Ghoul just has this great entrance where he's just in there already waiting. And he gets to stand there all cool in silhouette, and he brings up the defect in the armor that he knows about and says, I wonder if they ever fixed that, and then just shoots a knight, and the knight goes down quite easily. And we get this spectacular sequence where it's only lit by the gunfire, and so you're just getting flashes of light as the Ghoul's going around doing things, shooting Brotherhood of Steel members, throwing grenades into heads, which ultimately leads to this Brotherhood of Steel knight walking in without a head. But it's interesting, though, because it gets us to this point where the ghoul is actually asking for Lucy to come along. Like, hey, not that he needs her necessarily, but he's offering her a chance to get answers. Like, hey, your dad's been around a long time. I remember this dweeb from back in the day. We're going to go follow him, and if you want, you can come with. Yeah, and it's all very much, he's, standing up at the vista of the city, and it's all like dawn or dusk or whatever time of day it is, and he's walking off into the distance and is like, hey, you coming? So Lucy makes the choice to leave Maximus, but promises she'll look for him later. And Maximus ends up getting credit for killing Moldaver, because Moldaver comes in, she's like still already wounded, but she turns on the cold fusion, sits down, and dies. But because Maximus is standing next to her dead body, he's going to get the credit. So he could actually just be promoted to straight up knight next time. On the subject of him, it is kind of interesting that despite almost killing him in the big opening scene, what was his name? The guy from Mr. Robot, Elder Quintus, Elder Cleric Quintus. I'll just call him Quintus, I guess. Quintus kind of like does a quick double turn where he comes to Maximus and is like, hey, we can build a new brotherhood. We can, if you find me that head, I will be I'll be in charge of a new version of the Brotherhood, and you'll be the sword. And kind of basically makes it sound like, hey, you took power for yourself by taking that armor. It's almost kind of like a little swerve, in that he, in some fashion, actually appreciates and respects that Maximus took that armor for himself, that he let the knight die, that he did that. Because obviously he doesn't get all the details here, but he's maybe assuming a lot. Because Maximus just says that the knight died running, which is, yeah, it's true. He did. He ran like a coward and he died. Like, it's leaving out a lot of details, but it's I can't fault that part of it is true. But he's like, hey, that's, you work for me. And it kind of felt a little bit desperate to me. Like, Quintus sees, like, the community that they've built falling, and wants to make sure he's at the head of whatever new version of it emerges, and he wants to kind of like seize power for himself again as well. Something he's probably already done, and that's why he's such a high-ranking person in this organization in the first place. But I think actually that's the other thing that ties into all the reveals in this episode, is that we have these organizations in this future. We have the new California Republic, we got the Brotherhood of Steel, we have whatever the scientists ran from back at the start. We've not really seen that group, but it is another group. And I think that really fed into this idea of like that there's always going to be these new factions rising up. And it's ultimately going to make Vault-Tec's entire idea futile, because no matter how hard they try, they can't control humans this much. There will always be different ideologies. There will always be different groups rising up. And they're not good groups necessarily. I mean, New California Republic seem better based on what we see in the show, but they've probably done a lot of bad things too. It's not like they did nice things when they invaded the vault back at the start of the season, right? Like, that was pretty savage. They killed people, or at least people they hired to invade killed a lot of people. Like, it's not, their hands aren't clean. The Brotherhood of Steel are this ultra power hungry faction, which is predicated on a lot of like old school masculine ideas, which also feels very, very bad and very, very toxic. But the idea that you're going to stop everyone from developing any kind of rival ideology is kind of absurd. It does occur to me though that we never really got a good reason for why Moldaver is still around. Obviously we see there's cryopods in existence. We see that's how the Vault-Tec executives are sort of popping up still from the past. So you assume she had something like that, maybe, but she doesn't look like a ghoul. So maybe they'll get into that in season 2 for some reason, but they never felt the need to kind of bring that up and answer it in this episode, unless I missed something. So by all means, if I did, let me know in the comments. No, it's a very good finale. It had a lot of action, had some big set piece moments. We got a lot of Walton Goggins because of the flashbacks, but they kind of saved the ghoul, barring a little moment, for his big entrance. So it felt like it really made him feel like a cool guy again. Not that he ever lost his coolness, I'm not saying that, but I think they did a good job of just making him feel like a really big deal in this finale. So I appreciated that. So, we have this new status quo at the end. We have Lucy with him going off together, and it's very different from their first time as a pair because she's not a prisoner this time, and presumably she's toughened up because of the events of the season. He maybe respects that she wants to find answers and understands why she would want to find answers, because once upon a time he was the one going to the Vault-Tec building to find answers, even though the situation around him was very different. But he kind of understands this sense of discovery and realizing that your loved ones might be awful and they might be monsters and they might be doing something very bad. He's lived through that, so on some level I think he can relate to what she's just had to kind of like experience, and he knows that her attitude before, her beliefs were genuine. He found it annoying, but he understood that it was really who she was. So he knows that her entire like worldview has been shattered in the same way that him in the past was kind of shattered. He had these ideals that didn't want to shoot the bad guy in the movie because he wanted to promote good, merciful and kind ideas to people, but it was beat out of him, and he found out that his wife is behind the nuking potentially at that point. Obviously he doesn't know for sure it's going to happen, but he hears his wife say, let's just kill everyone so we can do this. That I think those things relating to each other is good. I still just think that ultimately Lucy's hope and naive attitude will still have a positive effect on the ghoul over time. I still think that's maybe the long game, is that she'll probably get a lot darker than she is, but there will be some elements of like humanity that kind of like are strengthened as well in other characters around her, that she's a positive influence in the people around her. And to an extent, we've already seen that with Maximus. Maximus, not a perfect human being by any means, but confesses things a bit more readily. I actually thought it was a bad idea for him to confess that he wanted to go with Lucy to Dane in this episode. I felt like that was a bit ballsy. I thought, given that Dane already lied about the whole Razorblade thing, I was like, can we trust Dane? I don't know. Like maybe that's a bad idea, Maximus. But obviously we get to this position by the end, and really excited to see where we go with this sort of new partnership that's a bit more solid defined. They've also got the dog with them, so that's something as well by that point. So yeah, really good stuff. I think it's wild that Lucy's had her world completely decimated multiple times at this point in the show. Episode 1, her vault world was invaded and taken apart, and then here at the end of the show, her entire idea of what her world has been her whole life has been shattered, and that someone is, and that's the idea that the ghoul kind of brings into it. When he's looking out at the horizon and he's talking about like, this looks like chaos, this looks like anarchy in a wasteland, but there's always someone who's benefiting from that anarchy, who's behind it. And that's who he wants to talk to. And of course, he also says that he wants to find his family. So this idea that his family are still alive, either awake or in cryopods somewhere to be found, definitely gives us some big like future potential end goals for that character. I can see a world in which his daughter's still a little girl, and he ends up like finally dying by like freeing her and like giving her some kind of different future that's not under what the mothers set up with the vaults and all the evil things that they're doing. So I there's a lot of potential now with all that stuff. So anywho, that is my thoughts on this, the finale and the season as a whole. Very, very good stuff by and large. There's little nitpicks to maybe find here or there if you want to. I think looking at the season as a whole, I really enjoyed everything it did, and I enjoyed most of the episodes to a very similar level where I found them very satisfying as chapters. I do think the overall journey that Lucy went on in terms of like actually traveling the wasteland actually feels quite small in hindsight, now that I'm looking back at the season, and how easy it was to just get to Moldaver's place at the start of this episode when it didn't feel like we were super close before. It feels like we've just kind of jumped to her being there now at the end. And I think that's just a focus thing. It's just about focusing. Did they want to focus how hard the journey is, or did they want to focus on all these other character things they're doing? And I think that's maybe just a slight disconnect there, but it's not like a major deal because the actual character stories are landing very well. So Yeah, by all means, let me know what you thought in the comments of the season. If you're excited for season 2, which we know is coming. But no, it's been a good time. So thank you very much for joining me. I always appreciate it. And of course, check out the other TV shows that I review. Unfortunately, I need to catch up on Star Trek Discovery now, so I guess I'll be talking about that. I don't like that show very much, though, so don't expect lots of kind things. There's a sci-fi show starting on Apple in the next week or two called Dark Matter. Might be good. I'll be checking that out. Plus, I do classic shows, if you've not noticed, with like X-Files, Person of Interest, which also has the Jonathan Nolan connection, and Michael Emerson. So, if any of that's of interest, check it out. And of course, there's the movie channel as well, Male Fuzz Movies, where there's 3 movie podcasts over there. There's a sci-fi movie podcast, which might be the most relevant, with myself and David. I also do Collector's Cut with him, and I do a horror movie podcast called Screams After Midnight over there. If those are of interest, go check them out. And of course, you can support everything over at patreon.com/MaleFuzzTV. Pardon me. But yeah, thank you very much for joining me. Hopefully you enjoyed going through the season with me. I'll see you guys next time. Keep watching TV. Have you got any vanilla?